Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the history of tattoos. Now, tattoo history spans over various different countries and numerous different cultures. Now, the earliest form of tattoos ever recorded dates back until about 3000 BC in the Egyptian country or state, if you will. Now, the Egyptians used tattoos for a variety of different reasons, but the most common was a symbol of their status or their rank. So I know many of you may have seen like the movie Prince of Egypt or whatnot. As you see, there's a clear distinction between royalty and those who were not at that moment. So that's what these tattoos, or which mainly depicted of certain characters like a bird or a tree or a sun, stuff of that nature. That's what they tattooed on themselves. Now, again, most of the tattoos at this time were tattooed on females. So I found that very interesting that most of the females are the one who carried these tattoos, and they extended on their arms as well as their forearms to their fingers. Now, also on their forearms here, what the females carried was a status of their trade. So if they were, I'm just going to pick something here and say basket weaving. So if you were a basket weaver, you had that tattoo symbol on your forearm, so that was a way of communicating with others. Interesting. Now, another culture that's very similar to the Egyptians are the Indians. Now, Indians, I found, again, dates back into well before Christ. They use tattoos for a variety of different reasons. Now, if we pinpoint just a few of those, I would say that the Indians used most of these tattoos as a form of protection. So, with the Indians, for them, they believed in a variety of different spirits and different gods, and especially your soul moving on to the afterlife. So as most people are familiar with, a lot of the Indian females who have a dot, whether it be red or black, they have a dot that's in the symbol of your forehead. Now what that does, it offers the person who has that tattooed on them a form of protection against the evil eye. And that's like a demon to them who doesn't allow your soul to pass on to the afterlife. Also with passing on to the afterlife is the many different markings that they had. So some of them formed like a maze on their bodies. And again, if you were marked, that means that you have already been saved, you're accepted, and once you moved on to the afterlife, then you were untouched. So many people, this again crosses over the gender lines of male and female, both of those genders, if you will. They got these tattoos because they wanted to protect themselves from any evil spirits. They wanted to ward off these demons. I want to say it's a little religious, but it's also superstitious as well. Like if you don't have these tattoos, my soul can't move on. That's India. So there are some cultures who like the Egyptians and the Indians, they decided that they wanted to embrace the tattoos. There's also ones that did not embrace it, like Great Britain. Great Britain just said no. That's it. So that not only was shunned, it was just outlawed, like, hey, tattoos, no. So another one, let's move on to like Asia. So let's just say China. So China, they outlawed tattoos roughly from the 7th to about the 18th century. Now, during this time period, there was a lot of like civil wars and everything. The world was coming to be as we were getting developed, right? And so during these wars, there were a lot of like crime that was going on, and there was an abundance of crime going on because, again, civil war. The Chinese needed a way to mark these individuals that were committing the crimes, and so if they got these assailants, and they've got them into their prisons or whatnot. And so how they would mark them as being a criminal is by the use of tattoos. Now, some of the most common marks were like some lines on the forehead. So similar to our 3-strike rule. So the Chinese had a similar system. So they would do like 1 strike, 2 strike, and then the third one would be an arch on the top. So after you got that third one there, you were either sentenced to death or you had a very extreme or harsh punishment. Now, again, Chinese, they because of this marking of the criminals with tattoos, the Chinese culture just inherited the fact that, like, hey, if you're marked, that means you're bad, therefore it is shunned. So for many, many years, again, 17th to the 18th century, the Chinese shunned these tattoos, saying, hey, we don't want those bad people around us. So even though it is illegal and accepted in the country now, it is still heavily frowned upon because of this past. Another culture that's very similar to the Chinese that adopted these principles were the Japanese. Japanese, again, said the same thing, like, hey, we're going to use these tattoos as a symbol of punishment, and it's just, again, heavily frowned upon. But they didn't have as much crime. They didn't have as many criminals as the Chinese did, since it's a smaller country. What they did have was these artists that came with these elaborate designs. Like for the Japanese, if you get a tattoo, you're getting a tattoo on like your full torso. And these artists, they were underground for a really, really long time until the government finally allowed them to tattoo the foreigners. So a lot of people attribute the like Navy sailors. Hey, Navy sailors. They attribute the Navy sailors to getting all these tattoos when they went overseas, especially Japanese or the Chinese. They're good for these elaborate designs of like birds and dragons. And the Japanese government allowed these artists to perform these tattoos, but they took an extremely long time. They were only by appointment. And again, it was only allowed for foreigners. Over time, it was allowed for everyone. But again, like the Chinese, it's still heavily frowned upon. One thing I did, and let me just backtrack just a little bit here for the Chinese. Another reason why they use the tattoos, not just for criminals, but a lot of females did get the tattoos as a form of protection. So again, heavily crime stuff going on in China. So females got a lot of that tattoos, and they tried to circulate it around their face and their arms just to ward off any kind of attackers or even rapists. So that's again heavily frowned upon for both cultures. Now, even now, it's just like, hey, we really don't like the tattoos. So next, we're going to move on to the Polynesia. Over here in Polynesia, it really consists of majority of the islands that's in the Pacific. So just for some examples, you have Hawaii, where I live. You also have Fiji, Tahiti, and also a small island called Samoa. Now, the Samoans, a wide, heavily known culture to be tattooed. Now, this tattoos for the Samoans, it's more like a rite of passage. Now, similar to a like a quinceañera for the Spanish, or even a bar mitzvah for the Jewish. So for the Samoans, they get tattooed. Now, this usually starts around when the child hits puberty. And what it does, it consists of an elaborate tattoo that's on the torso, again, to the upper thighs. Torso to the upper thighs, and it's mainly either consisted on either the front or the back portion of the body, or maybe even both. Now, this whole process of getting that tattoo, it takes, it could take a few weeks, and it takes maybe a few artists to do. And it's also done by hand. So they have their own special, mainly like shark teeth, or they have their own needles that they use, and it's all done by hand instead of the electric devices that they use to date. And even so, they have the devices even now. Again, just part of the culture, you get it done by hand. Now, this process, again, takes a really long time. But again, once you get this done, it's a full elaborate thing. And now you've earned that privilege of being part of the culture, if you will, if you get the tattoo done around puberty. Interesting. So last but not least, if we have our own culture here in the United States of tattoos. So ours roughly started, I'm going to say around maybe the 19th century. It was really something that was brought over by a few people from Europe when the immigrants came over. Again, it really didn't pick up a lot of tread over time. And some people were like, hey, that's bad. You're just a bad guy, or, you really like to cause a lot of trouble if you did have these tattoos. So it really didn't pick up again until maybe like the mid 1900s, I'm saying. And then it just started to gain tread. But even a lot of states, especially the southern states, decided that they didn't want to allow these tattoo parlors into their lower regions. So they moved on, and now tattoos are very prevalent here, but it's a variety blend of all the cultures all over the world. So you have some like Indians say, hey, I have to have this before I move on to the afterlife. You have some cultures like the British that said, no, we're not dealing with bad people. And also like the Chinese and Japanese, they're like, hey, you're criminals. But, you know, again, some of the foreigners who traveled like, hey, we love your designs. Hey, you all are great artists. I want to share a piece of that on my body. Now, this topic was just, I chose this topic because it's something I can directly relate to. I have, you know, Lord, about 9 tattoos on myself, but for my own reason, it's just a part of, it just marks every obstacle that I've overcome in my life. So people get it for a variety of different reasons, whether it's protection, whether it's so their soul can move on, something religious, or for like my case, it's just something that helped me along the years of my life. So a variety of different reasons, but just know that tattoos have a very long history, and more so now than ever, I believe they're here to stay. All right. So that was just a little bit of look into tattoo history. I hope you enjoyed.